Let's start at the beginning then. So, Buddha of Suburbia, was that the first time you'd met Roger when I put you in a room at the BBC?
I knew Roger in the 70s. I knew him in the 70s.
Oh, you knew him from the Royal Court?
I worked at the Royal Court. I was an usher. I worked at the theatre upstairs. I worked backstage. And Roger was an assistant director to Max Stafford Clark.
That's right.
And there were three directors, Antonia Bird, who died, Rog, and Danny Boyle worked for Max. And so I knew him from then, and we were friends until the moment he died, and we texted each other all the time. We were big mates for a long time, but we did fall out on many occasions as well. I think we're still falling out and in.
Was that on films, though?
Well, it was sometimes on films, but I remember there was a moment when we were doing Buddha of Suburbia, which the BBC had commissioned. Hanif's novel had been a huge hit, hadn't it? It was a real breakthrough book. I mean, it was a piece of autobiographical literary fiction that really broke out and became a kind of, very popular novel in the days before they stacked them that high at the front of Waterstones. And the BBC commissioned a 4-hour adaptation of it, which had a kind of rather rocky beginning, in terms of, not when you were involved, but if you remember, we had another screenwriter having a go at it for a while, which I think there was a first episode written which no one much liked.
Funnily enough, that's happened again. I'm doing the Buddha of Suburbia again. It was done as a 4-parter that Kev produced for the BBC. Now we're doing it as an 8-parter.
Yeah, well, everything gets longer.
It seems to me that 4 hours had barely scratched the surface of it. And again, we got another writer involved, and in the end, you have to do it yourself because it's my voice and my world.
My memory of the process of you and Roger, because you did actually adapt the screenplay together, seemed to be that you sat in my office at the BBC on Shepherd's Bush Green for many weeks, getting takeout dal and rice, making a horrible mess. And you had a bad back at the time, so you were lying on the floor a lot, and Roger seemed to be the scribe.
It was really fun, actually. We had a lot of fun. And then we went, I think, 3 times to Switzerland to work with David Bowie. And that was really funny and really frightening because he had a tiny little studio in... Montreux, Lausanne, yeah. And a tiny little studio, me and Kev and Rog would sit there and Bowie would play the music. And obviously, Bowie mostly wrote songs, which later appeared on the Buddha of Suburbia album, which is a good album. But songs don't really work as a soundtrack. You've got to write, the music's got to fit with the scene. And so I could see Roger's eyes going round and round and round, and I could see that Roger had to address David Bowie and had to tell David Bowie that the music wasn't quite right. And as you can imagine, the terror you felt at having to say to David Bowie, I think, this bit should be a bit quicker here, and that bit should be slower there, and that bit... and me and Kev are going, go on,
It
Roger.
was terrifying.
Go on, you tell David Bowie.
No, it literally was. We turned up at this studio, the 3 of us. We'd driven from Geneva Airport, hadn't we? And we turn up, and Bowie's got... I remember he had a sort of jam jar full of sharpened pencils, like a sort of cliche of an architect, and a yellow legal pad. And he literally licked his pencil as they started playing the first episode. And none of us dared look at him because we knew within 10 minutes he was about to fuck up our TV series. And we were like, oh my God, exactly as Hanif says, who's going to tell David Bowie there's too many notes, Mr. Mozart? And that fell to Roger, didn't it?
Yeah, it was Roger's job, yeah.
Director, that's why he gets paid the extra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did Bowie take it?
Bowie was fine.
Bowie was really good. What he did, he could feel our disapproval. And what he did, he stayed up all night and re-recorded the music and redid it. And then we put it to the thing and it was much better. I mean, he was a really hard-working person. There was one really embarrassing scene where me, Kev, and Rog, we drank a bottle of whiskey, and Bowie by then was completely clean. He had his suit on, he was looking good and healthy, and me, Roger, and Kev were completely drunk. We were so embarrassed. Do you remember that?
I do. He told us to go up the mountain and have lunch while he rewrote the music. That's right. And then we met him for dinner in the hotel, and we'd Yeah, we were a bit worse aware then because I think
Yeah.
the Duty Free had come out.
Yeah.
It's good. Anyway, the good thing about that first episode screening was that when it got to, the music was all over the place until you got to the very end, and then the song of the Buddha of Suburbia, the title song, which was and is brilliant
Great song, really great song.
And we were all like, phew. So at least we could come off the screening going, that song, it's just, David, that song. But the process for you and Roger was pretty collaborative, wasn't it? In terms of your early, you'd often send him very, very early, sort of almost skeletal drafts of things, and he'd say, "Yeah, that one might work. No, I'm not interested in that one," or whatever.
He was very abusive, Roger, isn't it? I don't know whether he was abusive to you.
All the time.
He'd be very abusive. You'd send him a script, and then you meet up with him. He'd get his pencil out, and he'd go like that right across the page, and then he'd write MB on the page. And I said, "What the fuck is this? What's MB?" He just says, "Make better," he said. He'd say, and I would try and make it better, and he would get really annoyed. And we collaborated really well for a long time. We had a lot of fun together, and we had a lot of arguments, and really good arguments, useful arguments, disagreements. And we would talk on the phone all the time about ideas. I'd ring him up and say, "Got an idea, this bloke and that woman, they do this and that," and he'd say, okay. But by the end, it was in sort of disarray. I mean, a collaboration is you do things with somebody else that you can't do by yourself, and the other person makes you better. And by the end, me and Roger sort of fallen out. I remember I gave him a play of mine, which has just opened in Italy, and he had it in front of him, and he got his little pencil out, and he started putting his pencil through the pages, and he put it through that page, then he turned over and he went like that. In the end, I thought, fuck it, I can't do this anymore. But we had a really good collaboration for a while, and I think some of those films that we did together are really nice.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, in fact, The Mother, which was the film we did in when was that, 2003, I guess, something like that? Which I don't know if
No, because we were making it. I remember watching 9/11 on
9/11,
television with you and Rog
yeah,
when we were
that's right.
actually working on it.
Yeah,
So it
that's
was
right.
earlier.
We were in the script meeting on
Yeah.
9/11. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
But that film has been playing recently again on BBC and on iPlayer. It's on iPlayer at the moment if you haven't seen it.
It's a great film. I'd love to have worked on it.
And people are still discovering that film. And
And Mr. Bond's in it.
and it's got Daniel Craig in. Yeah, that's true. Who was rather dubious about doing it when we first tapped him up. But
Yeah, it was.
it's absolutely magnificent in the film. But Kristina, the editing process of making films often the last rewrite,
Yes.
isn't it?
But
And,
Hanif, on the only time we crossed over
yeah, you
was
guys
on
only
the
crossed over on
weekend.
one on the weekend, didn't
Did
you?
you do The Weekend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good film. That's
Yeah,
probably
I
my
remember
favourite.
you. You don't remember me.
I don't remember anything or anybody, actually, so it's
Yeah.
not you.
I won't take it personally. Yeah, you and Roger worked really well on that, and you came in to look at a very early cut, which is really unusual for a writer. Because normally I get to work with the director first, and then we might get in the producer, and then we open it up. But you came to look at the assembly, if I remember rightly. And you came as well.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And it was the first time I'd worked with Roger, and these two just looked at each other and said, "Should we go to the pub?" And I was like, "Oh God, they hated it." And I stayed with you.
Yeah,
We
no,
had
it's
to do
good.
that.
But that process of the editing, I mean, you've worked with lots of directors, and you did what, 4 or 5 things with Rog, I think?
I worked out it's 6. Yeah.
Quite a lot then.
Yeah.
I mean, you were definitely the editor of choice.
Yeah, for that
Once you'd
period.
found each
Yeah.
other, you were definitely the editor of choice. So did you develop a kind of shorthand of how to work together, or?
Yeah, and Roger was really great from my point of view as an editor because he allowed me to do my job. He came in, we talked about things, we looked through everything he'd filmed, and he'd say, "I like that bit, I like that bit," and then he'd just go and leave me to do it. So I got the best of all worlds. Then he'd come back in, we'd discuss it more. But yeah, I knew the way he worked. I knew what he liked by film 6. And, every film was different. The Weekend was very different from My Cousin Rachel. But essentially, Roger was the same and worked the same way.
And the Christopher Jeffries thing.
Yeah,
we
and
did
the
as well.
Jeffries.
Oh, that was really good. I really enjoyed that.
Which was an
wonderful,
IT, and for
wonderful.
those of you who hadn't seen it, that was an ITV drama Roger did called The Lost Drama of
Two-parter,
Christopher
yeah.
Jeffries, written by Peter Morgan, which was about Roger's old English teacher from Clifton College who got falsely accused of murdering
Murder,
a young woman who lived in the flat beneath him, and it became a bit of a cause célèbre, and then was taken on tabloid intrusion and went on to the Leveson inquiry and so on, and it became a two-parter for ITV, which had an amazing performance by Jason Watkins as Christopher Jeffries. But
Collaborations are really fruitful and really useful, and then they become really terrible.
well, they're like marriages, aren't they, Harry?
Well, they're more interesting than marriages, I would say. Much more interesting
They
than
cost
that.
you less to
And
end.
you'd really have to argue for every bit. And Rog was really tough, and he could be really bullying, and I can be tough, and I could bully him back. And we would have these terrible wrestles about these pages, these passages, and you really had to fight for every line, and justify it. And there's something rather wonderful about that. On the other hand, you think, fuck it, I write what I like. It's my script, and I can say what I like, but you couldn't do that with Rog. You're really in a battle. And it's good fun, and it's terrible, and it became sort of terrible. But it was very fruitful as well, and I did things that I couldn't have done.
But I think
But I
it
couldn't
seemed
have
to
done
me,
without him.
and obviously, we've all worked together, but I wasn't in between the two of you in when you were doing the script work. But it always seemed to me that he was doing that to tease stuff out of you because he knows you're fundamentally
was he?
lazy.
Yeah. He was convinced I was lazy. He always used to say, recently I had a drink with another writer called Joe Pennell, who worked with, is a really good writer and a mate of mine, and worked with Roger a lot. And Joe Pennell said, Roger used to ring me out and complain about you all the fucking time. He said, that fucking Hanif Kureishi, he's such a wanker, he's so lazy. He's not a great writer like you, Joe. And then I'd have a drink with Rog, and he'd say, that Joe Pennell, I can't stand that fucker. He never does anything I say. He's useless.
Well, that's why they're called directors.
What about you and Roger?
Well, so my story is, Roger, is that we started working together on, but I met him, I was at university at the same time as Roger, but I didn't know him then, although I saw a lot of his student productions, because he was the sort of star student director of his generation at Cambridge in those years. It was him and Nick Heitner. Those were the two star student directors. Everyone knew those two people were going to have careers in the theatre, and indeed they did. And they were completely different in style then, and they're completely different in style now. So it's been kind of interesting, particularly as I've made films with Nick Heitner as well as with Rog. But I didn't really get to work with him until he came to do the BBC Directors course in about 1990, which was the thing the BBC drama department used to run to get people from the theatre or from documentary backgrounds to come and basically do a 3-month crash film school where lots of distinguished people would tell you how to make teledrama, and then you'd get to make a short film at the end of it. And Roger's short film was really good. And on the basis of that, my boss at the BBC at the time, who was very characterful and brilliant producer called Michael Waring, who produced Edge of Darkness and Boys in the Black Stuff, he gave Roger a chance to direct a 3-hour BBC serial called Downtown Lagos, written by Lee Jackson, who sadly is no longer with us either. And then on the basis of that, we managed to persuade the BBC that he was the right person to take on Buddha of Suburbia. So that was when I started working with him. And shortly after that, we set up the company together that we have, which made most of his films. And we set that up because we won the rights to Captain Corelli's Mandolin from Lou de Bernier. And that was a film. Roger was very interested in anything to do with World War II. That was a kind of European story about World War II because it didn't really have any English characters in. There's one in the book, but not in the film. And so we started really working on feature films together at that point. And although we didn't exclusively work together and we both made films with other people, you know, we had the company together and we were constantly exploring things to do. I have to say, as a producer, he was, you know, incredibly difficult to find material for, because although I knew him really well over 30 years, I still couldn't always predict whether he would like something. You know, you'd read a book and think, is he going to like this? Is he going to think this is a film worth making? And I had no idea which things he would respond to, you know, from the beginning to the end. And although we sort of shared taste in, I think, in our approach to things, it was just about the range of his interests and what he would find that he had to engage in with something. Because, you know, it's a big deal directing a film. You know, you have to hold your nose and go under, and it's kind of, you know, 2 years of your life. You don't do it lightly. Yeah. And you're not going to get to do that many. So.
And you've got to defend it for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and then you've got to go out and sell it and defend it for the next 2 years. I mean, it's true. So I think it is, you know, you have to feel very passionate about things to really want to be a director of a film of them. But one of the great things I always felt was, as you say, he kind of knew what he wanted. And he certainly knew what he liked. And so actually, I think everybody who worked with him behind the camera always really appreciated the clarity, because you could always go to Roger and say, do you like this or do you like that? And he would always go this or that or neither, bring me something better. But there was never kind of, can I get back to you on that? Oh, I don't know, I'm really torn.
Or can we try it many different ways?
You know, it was very, very clear in his mind which path you would go down.
And the actors really liked Rog. I mean, that's a really good sign with the director. They really liked to work with him. Kate Winslet said in the newspaper the other day that he was a man without ego. Kev and I rather...
We won't make that text exchange public, but it was very affectionate.
We rather gasped at that point. But fair enough. I mean, actors really like to work with him because he and we made a film about actors, Venus, about two old actors. And Raj was very keen to portray the actors as being, you know, decent, hard-working, committed people. He didn't think actors were sort of idiotic lovies. He thought they were serious people who did a really hard job and loved their profession, etc. So I think it's a really good sign with the director if the actors actually enjoy working with them and the director makes them feel that they're doing good work.
Well, we never had any problem casting any film that Roger was
And he
directing.
always, in the edit, he would be saying, oh, I've just got a text from Kate. He always kept in touch with the actors and, you know, communicated with them.
I think that's right. He really did like actors and liked hanging out with actors, and that's partly because of his love of the theatre. I mean, he and I have just finished a documentary about the Queen, which is, you know, but prior to that, Roger made 3 documentaries about actors. You know, he made one about Harish Patel, who was was our Changes in Buddha of Suburbia, who was a Bollywood actor, and when he came to be in Buddha, he told us hilarious stories about what it was like to be a Bollywood character actor in the early 90s. So Roger and I went to Bombay, as it still was then, and made a film about him, a sort of constructed documentary.
I'd like to see that again. I haven't seen that for years.
It's called Ready When You Are, Mr. Patel. It was an omnibus. And then Roger made a film about Michael Redgrave for Omnibus, and then some of you will have seen the conversational film he had with Maggie Smith and Judi Dench and Eileen Atkins and Joan Parright, Nothing Like a Dame. So he and I have just finished we were just finishing making a documentary when he sadly died in September about the Queen, who's another kind of actor, I suppose. So there was kind of... so yes, the very last film, which is not a drama, will be this documentary called Elizabeth, A Portrait in Parts, which comes out for the Jubilee, which is a royal documentary unlike any other because it has no commentary and no talking heads and nothing specially shot. It's just archive music and thematic kind of assemblage, as I said to you before. Really, I mean, it's a really interesting piece. So I think,
And the other thing that Roger had, he always had a team of people he worked with again and again.
Yeah.
You know, he had a loyal team, and we, at Roger's funeral, we sat together, the team, and we were all very sad that we may not work together as that team again.
I think the post-production world is one that doesn't really get that much attention, does it? But that, you know, the stuff that you guys do, and even after the cut is locked with the mixing and the grading and the music and the, you know, and all that sort of design that goes into the finished product. We had a very regular team of people we worked with, didn't we?
Yep, yeah, all the same people. And
all the same people all the time, which was, you know, great, because partly it's kind of, you know, it's a bit like family making a film, and you know, the family disperses and then you get back for another family reunion when you've got another film to make, which is, you know, one of the great things about working in the industry.
And you don't always want to do that with some directors.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. And the same thing happened, you know, in front of the, you know, on the actual shooting. We had a very regular team of ADs and cinematographers and designers, costume designers and so on, who, as Justin was saying earlier, you know, there was definitely a kind of theatre company around Rog and his work. I mean, I personally miss him terribly as a friend, but I miss working with him, and I miss being able to ring him up and ask his opinion about something, because he became, I mean, we didn't always agree, like Hanif says, but I always took what he said incredibly seriously, and he could certainly shake my confidence more easily than anybody else in what I was doing, in ways that were kind of challenging. And
he always wanted your opinion, even when you weren't the producer.
yeah, that sometimes caused problems. But not with Nicky. But yeah, no, there were, particularly on some of the American movies that he made, where I don't think he kind of had producers in quite the way he was used to working with me and some of the other producers he worked with here. You know, it's a rather different job sometimes with big American films. But although this isn't the Q&A about the Duke, was it, you know, you had a wonderful time, I imagine, 'cause it's such a joyful film. And,
and we finished filming 2 weeks before lockdown. So yeah, but it was a really nice experience because it was so quiet and there was just the two of us. And he was on top form, and he was telling me what he was doing next. And
yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. He had a lot of projects.
Oh, and he seemed to read every single script that was going around Soho. Roger had read it.
That too. I mean, he did get offered everything. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there's barely a film that's been made in the last 20 years in Britain that hasn't gone across Roger's desk at some point, probably. Thanks for putting up with our impromptu conversation. You're really going to enjoy this, I can promise you. And although I had nothing to do with it, I think it's an absolutely fabulous last feature film for Rog. So enjoy that, and Nicky and Jim will be here later.